I've been playing around with the third person recently, narrating a somewhat like me, somewhat not like me character for this novel project that I thought might see me through winter. But the gods, as I understand them to be, are not that interested in novels, right? They want to see reality. A man making a luxury table out of denim and epoxy, or another man. Yeah, I mean, on the whole, these still tend to be men working out of, who knows what, some sort of evolutionary impulse to barter visible effort for the faint hope of erotic recognition in the broader sense of that word, to prove through joinery or kiln or camera that they are, however briefly, worth mating with. So we watch them, throwing a beautiful clay pot or a mug or something like that on the wheel, or building a house out of discarded ski boots or melted Lego or compacted coffee grounds, whatever will draw the measuring gaze of women and the appraising glance of other men, both audiences silently assessing, competing, and perhaps, if the gods are kind, converting that attention into the tender currency of desire, interest, companionship. I is a sticky pronoun, however. I notice this in therapy when I coax someone to refer to a part of their psyche in the third person, and they struggle to keep this metacognitive distance on themselves. The I is sticky, the I is solvent. It clings to whatever it touches, insinuating itself into each object or pronoun or passing thought, blatantly refusing the fiction of distance, insisting always on its own return. But let's say this I, or as Freud calls his subject in the interpretation of dreams, der Trauma, the dreamer, the more often simply just I, ich, depending on how closely he wishes to bind the self, his self, to its own performance. Let's say this consciousness, this dreamer consciousness, were to wake in the middle of the night with the following dream, which he recounts very quickly to GPT before trying to fall back asleep. The dream in question might sound something like this. I dreamt I was packing to go away, to go abroad. The great escape from myself that I had been planning for some years now, as well as from the life that I had built around that self, for that self. But at the very end, as time was running out to reach the airport, as is so often the case in these dreams for me, but I know these are also, the sorts of dreams, anxiety dreams that lots of us have. As time was running out to reach the airport, though I rarely travel and was, all in a sort of stress-filled flurry, deciding what to leave behind, books, coats, notebooks, other heavy paraphernalia, I realized at that moment that I didn't have my phone. Someone, my father, my stepfather, perhaps, he hands me an old Nokia, some old, slow smartphone maybe, and I understand that I will still try to go now, even without the very thing that carries so much of me within it, through it, all that virtual life. And then the person that I'm packing with, a kind of a motherly figure, at once, sort of chiding me and urging me on, says, "Okay, You're all packed, you're ready to go. Go and say goodbye to Max. And I'm thinking, what? How? And then the dreamer recognizes that he is crying as Max comes over and he is having to say goodbye to him. And the dreamer is thinking, I can't leave him. And thankfully he couldn't, because I woke up and there he was, sleeping beside me. A text announces itself on that phone, the aforesaid phone, which reads like this. Hello, Steve. I'm having many issues in my relationship with my adult daughter, from whose father I've been divorced for 35 years. It's causing us both a lot of distress. Is this something you might be able to help with? If it's easier, I'm happy to have a quick chat on the phone. Let me know. Kind regards, Reika Ganesan. This, I am here to tell you, is a common trope in therapy inquiries. The individual presents with a standard human dilemma and then asks the therapist whether they have experience in dealing with this issue, whether such a matter would in fact fall within their remit, which you could say is a bit like going to a mechanic with faulty brakes and saying, kind of with polite hesitation, are you able to do something with these? Of course, most mechanics offering the service are not going to turn away the business with the brakes, whether these are brakes that he knows by heart or a system he's never before laid eyes on. But implicit in all this, which is, we might describe as the performance in some way every therapist must maintain in order to be of use to another, is the unspoken assumption that here lies an issue that upsets and destabilizes me, this I, the me now asking for your attention, your curiosity, perhaps even your care. I mean, of course, I will pay you for this, but I am also asking for this. And this me hopes, perhaps even trusts, which is good, trust is useful, that some kind of you that I'm directing this inquiry towards might already have, in some way, some kind of profound altruistic interest in me and in what I take to be my unique circumstances. And this is the illusion, or I would say the shared delusion, that every therapist must support, or at least not puncture too soon, or ever, that the individual, the I, with their thoughts, feelings, entanglements of family, love, work, and all the grievances that follow from this, has a story to tell, and that their wish is that you might find this story archetypal, maybe even if it is a kind of, as all stories are, sort of archetypal soap opera narrative, that you will find it interesting, meaningful, nourishing in some way to attend to this story, which in fact I do, this being one of, the perverse aspects of my own inner world, a quiet satisfaction in hearing the repetition of our shared human suffering, dressed up each time in somewhat new clothes or with a new name. This is also the dilemma that all content creators must face, which is why some will try to avoid, laying their existential woes at the feet of the gods, as I maybe am doing here by, and they'll do this by paying for an audience to their distress, the therapist, or maybe someone else. The truly great content creators, we might call them artists, are able to swap this dynamic around and have the audience, the accidental therapist you could say, pay them to hear their long-suffering or short-suffering monologues proffered in the form of books, songs, films, installations, stand-up routines, etc. But for everyone else, including me in this case, we must give something of monetary worth for another to perform the listening, the holding, and the mirroring, if you like, of our woes and our grievances, but also our joys and our thrilling ideas or whatever, or else I don't know, take our chances parasocially on podcast streams, this sort of thing, in order to feel briefly less alone, to find that flicker of recognition that we're always looking for from our human tribe, or to reassure ourselves that our story, whatever that is, whatever the story of the I is, and let's say there are 9 archetypal stories, 9 archetypal I's, whatever that story is, as old and archetypal as it probably is, well, somehow this story too, there are only 9 and all of them matter. Somehow this matters in some small and unrepeatable way to another, and only because someone, somewhere, like me or you, might be willing to hear it. GPT helps me craft the best reply for Reka because, I'm the one paying its dues. It naturally tilts its writing towards the subscriber rather than the seeker of succor or help in this case, although maybe strikes a good balance. This is what it says. Hi Reka, thank you so much for getting in touch. I'd be very glad to talk with you further about this, as it's an area I've worked with quite a lot over the years. It might be helpful for us to have a full hour together to explore things in depth and look at the different perspectives involved. After that, I can put together some notes and offer a clear professional sense of how we might move forward. Would you be open to that? I currently have a space on Mondays at 2:15 p.m. and there's a possibility we could even do that today if it suits you. I also have availability on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. or 8:15. We can meet in person, online, or by phone, whatever feels most comfortable to you. Warmly, Steve. Yes, I think when GPT generates this will do for a text message. The phrase, quote, offer a professional sense of how we might move forward. I don't know. That to me sounds the most GPT of all of this. GPT is still not really Claude, but it's got all this functionality, and I want Claude's writing brio, but I want the functionality of GPT. Anyway, so I send it. I can't be bothered to find a better alternative, and probably, for Reka, this will suffice. For her, it will suffice, and for him, to me, I don't know, I'm not so sure, which is why I'm writing this here. The problem, as well as the freedom of the third-person voice I have been finding in writing the, 30,000 words that I've given over to that voice recently, to this he who is narrating this novel, right, is that this voice speaks as if from a place already deserted. It narrates, we could say, what has withdrawn, what is, that's how it seems, what is no longer really belonging to the one who is writing it, right? Each sentence arrives as if after the event, like a message found in the ashes, you could say, sort of legible but somewhat a bit cold. This last phrase also sounds GPT-ish. Do I sound like this? Do I now write like fluent GPT? But the first person voice is equally spectral, sort of too present to be believed, if you like, too busy insisting upon its own reality, really, to be trusted, the unreliable narrator, etc., etc. Every I carries in its luggage an implicit oath, however faint or unspoken, sworn before the tribunal of those who listen, in this case, or watch, sort of, or read. To speak in the first person is always, in a sense, to appear before a court, even if that court is made up of, the Madeleines, the phantoms, the ghosts, the gods of you. One cannot help but feel accused in advance, well, I can't, of insincerity, of exaggeration, of imposture. Is it no coincidence that Montaigne, the great inaugurator, you could say, of self-writing, continually interrupted himself, excused himself, disowned himself, because he knew that the I, you could say, is not a fortress, even though he lived in a bit of a fortress while he was writing the essays. But anyway, the I is not a fortress, but more of a sieve, or a sieve, porous, unreliable, and then in writing it down one is already sort of betraying it, but that's okay. Hence the pull I feel constantly to this third person, to the novelistic he or she, which allows then for, proximity and distance, a game of masks that history has thankfully always permitted us fools who play this game. Cervantes already disguising himself behind that false historian Cide Hamete Benengeli in order to, deny responsibility for what his character said, as if authorship were too dangerous a burden to bear, which it sort of is. Who wants to put their soul, as it were, behind the eye, to stand behind the eye as a soul? I don't. Rousseau, centuries later, would do the opposite, right? He'd take the eye to its most naked and perilous extreme, binding his readers to him in a kind of covenant of truth, but at the cost of chaining himself forever to those words, a prisoner of his own confessions, now published by Penguin or whatever language you read in. And between these two gestures, the mask and the oath, the novel and the autobiography, oscillates all our modern discourse, including what we now flatteringly, or actually very unflatteringly, call content, although most of that is unfortunately content, which pretends to spontaneity but is weighed down by these contracts of veracity, implicit promises, even if only the promise to be authentic, a word already hollowed out by excessive use and overused, particularly by me. So Rekha, she texts me back. This is not her name, by the way. It's actually the name of a Bollywood actress who was in this film called Dil Hai Tumhara, which I saw many years ago. And she plays this character who struggles to get on with the daughter, as I imagine, the daughter, the real daughter, the daughter of Rekha. Anyway, this is what Rekha writes. Thanks for your message. I should have said that my daughter is amenable to counselling too. I envisage us coming together so that you could be impartial, and we can then, you see the judge, it's looking for a judge, the eye's looking for a judge, and we can then see you separately in future as you advise. I can't do this afternoon, but next Monday may be possible. I can ask my daughter, let me know your thoughts, and if you feel I should come alone to begin with. Thanks, Rekha. Sounds very Enneagram 6. There's that kind of like, you're in charge. Like, I'm just another talking monkey here with a few, books under my belt, having books read, not books written. Anyway, so I respond to the text a little bit more in my own voice. Hi there. Yes, there are two directions we could take here. One would be family therapy, where you and your daughter work together in sessions to explore, improve your relationship. That's not something I personally offer, though there are many therapists who specialize in that kind of joint work. What I tend to focus on is how, we might bring about change within our own inner world, how we relate to others, how much we can accept or not accept them, how that affects the ease or difficulty of our relationships. This is, in essence, bold claim, what most therapy involves. I didn't write bold claim, but that's just in brackets. What most therapy involves, and which I find to be most effective, as we can only really change ourselves. Other people often don't change. Hint, hint, your daughter. Or have a particular personality style. You're a 6, Rekha. I don't say this, but this is what I'm thinking. You're a kind of a 6, and probably she's a bit of a, I don't know. Who's going to really annoy the 6? Answers in the comment section. She's that. And so, what can we do but accept? Serenity prayer, serenity prayer. I don't write any of this. But I do send her back a kind of, good, professional, sanctified by the ethical framework of the BACP response. You are expressing, GPT tells me, when we speak on this theme of the third person versus the first person perspective, you're expressing a desire to break that contract between witness and self, or at least to loosen it, to recover for speech and writing the metaphysical freedom that belongs more to fiction, shall we say, than to testimony. For in truth, no one, not even the gods or their digital heirs, is interested in our facts, our verified data, our attested sufferings. They are interested in what exceeds us, what we ourselves do not know and cannot control, which is always the province of the novel, even when presented as autobiography. The novel is always, this is still GPT, by the way, I know it really sounds a lot like me, but that's because it's had a lot of my prose run through it. The novel is always freer than its author. It is what allows him to escape even from himself, and this is why many of us, chained as we are to blood and bone, I love that, chained as we are, this is GPT, right? The bot using this sort of human subscribed language here. What does the bot know of being chained to blood and bone? Well, it knows it linguistically, as do we. How much of what our chained stuff is linguistic, how much of it is corporeal? I suspect the chain to blood and bone is more corporeal. The novel is always freer than its author. And this is why so many of us have longed to inhabit it, as one inhabits a second life, even if that life is composed only of words. And this, of course, is true. Last night I was rereading that incredible, first 20 pages of Kristeva's Powers of Horror. Find a PDF of that online, just read, it's just amazing. And then I thought, let me go and I was like, Kristeva, yeah, who the hell was Kristeva? So I went and read a little bit of Alice Jardine's biography, which came out in 2020, called At the Risk of Thinking. And then, following on from that, down the rabbit hole, I kind of read a couple of chapters of The Samurai, which was Kristeva's first novel, which she wrote in her late 40s. And unlike the earlier, theoretical work, offers this really fascinating glimpse into the socio-cultural, psychological matrix out of which Kristeva, that formidable intellect, took form. The novel, I think you realize when you read it, after coming from a lot of the critical prose, gives you access to, let's say, Julia rather than to Kristeva. Although they're not that dissimilar. I mean, even at her most abstract, Kristeva is poetically intimate, often viscerally polemical. Only in the novels, maybe not as rivetingly as in the critical work. I'm not sure I would ever buy a copy of The Samurai, but I'd sort of happily flick through a PDF of it, whereas I really want to own The Power of Horror. It has a sort of canonical resonance for me. I think I'm going to give the last word here to Maurice Blanchot, from the space of literature where he dwells quite a bit on these themes. This is what he says: to write is to withdraw language from the world, to detach it from what makes it a power according to which, when I speak, it is the world that declares itself, the clear light of day that develops through tasks undertaken, through action and time. Reality, I guess, in inverted commas, or not so inverted commas. The blood and bones stuff of it all. Writing is the interminable, the incessant. The writer, it is said, gives up saying I. Kafka remarks, this is still Blanchot quoting Kafka, Kafka remarks with surprise, with enchantment, that he has entered into literature as soon as he can substitute he for I. This is true, but the transformation is much more profound. The writer belongs to a language which no one speaks, which is addressed to no one, which has no center, and which reveals nothing. Where he is, only being speaks, which means that language doesn't speak any more, but is. the third person substitute for an I, such is the solitude that comes to the writer on account of the work. The third person is myself become no one, my interlocutor turned alien. It is my no longer being able, where I am, to address myself, and the inability of whoever addresses me to say I. It is his not being himself. I write in order to die, to give death its essential possibility, through which it is essentially death, source of invisibility. But at the same time, I cannot write unless death writes in me, makes of me the void where the impersonal is affirmed. Grant me the death which is not mine, the death of no one, the unreality and the absence where nothing happens, where neither love nor meaning nor distress accompanies me, but the pure abandonment of all that.